The sound of Gemma Pattinson's fingertips accurately tapping the calculator keys echoed in her small home office. As a single mother, she glanced at the clock while making final adjustments to a client's year-end financial statement. She had to pick up her son, Venus, from school in 30 minutes. "Mom, aren't you done yet?" 10-year-old Venus peeked into the room. His bright brown hair and big blue eyes resembled his father's. Gemma smiled and picked up her coffee mug. "I'll be done soon. Did you finish your homework?" Venus nodded and showed her the paper in his hand. "I solved all the math problems, but I have a question about history." Gemma always took pride in her son's school performance. She herself had supported their household and raised her son alone while working as an excellent accountant at a small local company. Since her father passed away from a heart attack 5 years ago, her responsibilities had increased, but she never complained. "Can you wait just 10 more minutes? I'll help you with history when I'm finished." The phone rang, and Gemma sighed. It was from her mother, Xenia. "Listen, Gemma, we need to talk about tomorrow's dinner party." Xenia's voice always had a demanding tone. "Madeline is bringing her fiancé. You'll be coming, won't you?" Gemma frowned. Her sister, Madeline, had always been the favored child in the family. Beautiful and sociable, she was Xenia's favorite daughter. In comparison, Gemma was always told she was too practical and boring. "Of course I'll come, Mom. I'll bring Venus too." On the other end of the line, she heard her mother sigh. "Well, I suppose that's fine. But make sure he behaves himself. Don't let him ruin Madeline's special day." Gemma swallowed her words. Venus was always a well-mannered child. If there was a problem, it was with her mother and Madeline. "Don't worry. So what does Madeline's fiancé do?" "Edward Neeson. He's an investment banker from a very wealthy family." Xenia's voice was filled with pride. "He's perfect for Madeline. He graduated from Harvard. He's cultured, sociable." Gemma rolled her eyes internally as she listened to her mother's boasting. Her mother's values were always focused on appearances and social status. The next day, Gemma and Venus arrived at Xenia's luxurious suburban home. Taking a deep breath at the entrance, Gemma gave Venus's shoulder a tight squeeze. "It's okay, Mom," Venus said. "I know Grandma and Aunt Madeline don't like us very much." Gemma's heart ached at her son's perceptiveness. Children are more sensitive than adults realize. When she opened the door, she could already hear Madeline's high laughter coming from the living room. She was wearing an elegant cocktail dress, holding a glass, and talking to an unfamiliar man. "Gemma, Venus, you've finally made it." Xenia greeted them with a cold smile. "Madeline, Gemma, and Venus are here." Madeline turned around and smiled at her sister, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Gemma, I'm so glad to see you. This is my fiancé, Edward Neeson." Edward stood up and turned to face Gemma. He was tall, with dark brown hair and kind eyes, and something brushed the corner of Gemma's memory. It was a face she had seen somewhere before. "Nice to meet you, Gemma," Edward said in a quiet voice. "I've heard a lot about you from Madeline." He extended his hand, and Gemma shook it. His hand was warm, and his grip was gentle. "Nice to meet you too," Gemma said. "This is my son, Venus." Edward smiled at Venus and looked directly into the boy's eyes. "Hello, Venus. I'm glad to meet you. What grade are you in?" "Fifth grade," Venus answered a little nervously. "That's a wonderful age. When I was in fifth grade, I made a model of the solar system for the science fair." Edward's voice was gentle, and he seemed used to talking with children. Madeline cleared her throat disapprovingly. "Edward, could you pour me some wine?" Gemma had a good impression of Edward. He seemed mild-mannered and thoughtful. It was surprising that he was engaged to someone with a self-centered personality like Madeline. During dinner, Xenia and Madeline talked endlessly about wedding preparations, the wonderful wedding dress, the high-end reception venue, the famous catering company. Gemma's opinion was never sought even once. "Gemma, you don't need to worry about the dress since you're not a bridesmaid," Madeline said abruptly. Gemma looked up in surprise. "I'm not a bridesmaid?" "I'm sorry, but we haven't been very close for a long time, have we?" Madeline's voice was filled with fake sadness. "Besides, you must be busy being a single mother, with work and all." Xenia nodded in agreement. That's right, Gemma. We don't want to burden you. Gemma felt a pain in her chest, but kept her expression unchanged. She was used to rejection from her family. Venus's hand grasped hers under the table. Only Edward wore an uncomfortable expression. He cleared his throat and quietly said, "But isn't family participation important? I think Gemma and Venus should be part of this special day." Madeline turned to her fiancé with a surprised look. "Of course they're invited. It's just that the bridesmaids are already set with my close friends." Gemma sent Edward a grateful smile. At least he seemed to be a considerate person. After dinner, while Gemma was helping with the cleanup, Edward came into the kitchen. "Can I help?" he offered. "It's fine. I'm used to it," Gemma answered. "Madeline and Mom expect me to fill the practical role." Edward silently watched her for a moment. "You're different from what Madeline told me," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Edward smiled. "I just hope we'll have more chances to talk. With you and Venus." After he left, Gemma was struck by a strange feeling. Edward's face flickered in her memory. She must have met him somewhere, but she couldn't remember when or where. In the car on the way home, Venus suddenly said, "Edward seems like a nice person. I wonder why he's marrying someone like Aunt Madeline." Gemma couldn't help but laugh. "Venus, you shouldn't say things like that." But deep down, she had the same question as her son. As the wedding preparations progressed, Gemma felt increasingly alienated from her family. Madeline and Xenia didn't share the wedding details with her or ask for her opinion. Still, she quietly handled the behind-the-scenes work, addressing invitations, communicating with the venue, fine-tuning details, areas where her meticulousness as an accountant came in handy. "You're helping again?" One day, Edward stood beside Gemma as she worked on preparations. "Madeline seems too busy to handle these practical matters herself." "Don't worry about it. I'm good at this kind of thing," Gemma shrugged. Edward observed her for a while before saying, "You seem familiar somehow." Gemma stopped and looked up at him. "I've been feeling the same way, but I can't quite place it." At that moment, Venus came running into the room. "Mom! Edward, I finished my homework." Edward smiled at Venus. "What kind of homework was it?" "A history project. I researched the Roman Empire," Venus answered proudly. "Really? I love history too." Edward sat down next to the boy and showed interest in his project. Gemma felt a warm feeling spread in her chest as she watched the scene. Edward seemed to have a genuine interest in her son. Madeline's fiancé was clearly different from the men in the past, who never bothered to meet Venus despite becoming part of her family. A week before the wedding, Edward made an unexpected phone call. "Gemma, I want to talk to you about something." His voice was serious. "I want you to be the maid of honor." Gemma was so surprised she lost her words. "But Madeline didn't even choose me as a bridesmaid." "I asked her myself. Family is important, especially on important days like a wedding." There was determination in Edward's voice. Madeline eventually agreed. Gemma felt conflicted. She doubted her sister was truly happy about it, but she was filled with gratitude for Edward's warm gesture. The next day, Xenia called Gemma in a fury. "Madeline is crying. Why did you ask Edward for such a thing?" "I didn't say anything. Edward suggested it himself." "I can't believe this," Xenia spat out. "You always make yourself look like a victim and try to ruin Madeline's life. This is her special day." Gemma took a deep breath to stay calm. "I want Madeline to be happy. If she truly doesn't want me to be her maid of honor, I'll decline." "You can't decline now. Edward has already decided." Zania's sigh was audible. "Just don't stand out too much. This is Madeline's day." On the wedding day, Gemma arrived at the church early with Venus. She wore a modest sky-blue dress. It might have been too simple for a maid of honor, but it was out of consideration not to upset Madeline. "Mom, you look beautiful," Venus smiled. In the preparation room, Madeline was surrounded by bridesmaids, dressed in an extravagant wedding gown. When Gemma entered, her sister merely glanced at her and gave a cold nod. "Well, Gemma," Xenia said with pursed lips, "that dress is, well, it's just like you." The ceremony proceeded solemnly. Gemma stood behind Madeline, maintaining a smile as she gazed at Edward's gentle expression. He occasionally glanced at Gemma, smiling reassuringly. The reception began with the entrance of the bride and groom, toasts and dancing. Gemma sat at a table with Venus, quietly enjoying their meal. Soon, it was time for speeches. Madeline stood up and took the microphone. She looked around the room and turned her gaze toward Gemma. Suddenly, her smile transformed into a malicious expression. "Everyone, thank you for coming today," Madeline said in a sweet voice. "I'm happy to share this special day with family and friends." After talking about the joy of marriage for a while, she suddenly pointed at Gemma. "By the way, this is my sister Gemma, a single mother who has lived without being loved by anyone." Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the venue. "Anyone want to take her in?" The blood drained from Gemma's face. Venus's small hand gripped hers tightly. Just kidding," Madeline said with a laugh. Some in the audience laughed, but many shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Zinnia took the microphone. "Our eldest daughter is always so serious and boring," she said in a glossy voice. "She's second-hand goods, but still usable. Comes with a I've son." This time, laughter erupted from various parts of the venue. Gemma sat frozen. Tears welled up in Venus's eyes. "Mom," he said in a trembling voice. Gemma slowly stood up and took her son's hand. "Let's go," she said quietly. But at that moment, from the corner of her vision, she saw Edward slowly rising. His face was red, clearly restraining his anger. The venue fell silent, all eyes turning to the groom. Edward took a deep breath and moved away from Madeline to take the microphone. His eyes caught Gemma's, trying to convey something. The venue became deadly quiet. Edward's expression showed a severity never seen before. With the microphone in hand, he began to speak slowly, emphasizing each word. "Ladies and gentlemen, today has become a day when I make the most important decision of my life. However, it is not the decision you might think." The smile disappeared from Madeline's face, replaced by confusion. Xenia stood frozen. "First, let me say a word about that speech just now." Edward's voice was calm but clearly suppressing anger. Those words directed at Gemma and Venus were cruel and thoughtless. "I cannot share such values." Madeline started to open her mouth, but Edward quietly raised his hand to stop her. "Actually, there's something I want everyone to know." Edward took a deep breath and continued. "Gemma and I have not met for the first time." Gemma looked up in surprise. Something was starting to stir within her. The fog in her memory was gradually clearing. 10 years ago, when my sister Gina was fighting leukemia, Gemma was working as a volunteer at the hospital. Edward's voice trembled slightly. "I was 22 then, and I was saved by the kindness and strength of Gemma, who was 25 at the time." The last few months of Gina's life, Gemma continued to support her and our family. Hot tears welled up in Gemma's eyes. Gina Neeson. Of course, she remembered her, a young woman diagnosed with leukemia in her mid-20s. Gemma herself had experienced the same illness when she was young, and after recovery, she had started volunteering at the hospital as a way to give back. Even after Gina passed away, Gemma continued to care about our family. "After my sister's death, it took me a long time to recover from the deep sadness," Edward continued. He choked on his words for a moment, then began speaking again. "Then, 3 years ago, I met Madeline at a party. I was attracted to her brightness and sociability. I didn't learn that Madeline was Gemma's sister until after we started dating." Edward's eyes turned to Madeline, and his expression mixed with sadness and disappointment. "The stories I heard about Gemma from her, looking back now, were all filled with prejudice, but I wanted to believe people could change." Madeline's face began to contort with anger. Zinnia had collapsed into a chair. "After our engagement, I began to notice Madeline's true nature," Edward quietly continued. "I was particularly shocked when I first saw Venus. He was the little boy who occasionally came to Gina's hospital room." Gemma gazed at Venus. Her son, who was 5 at the time, sometimes accompanied her hospital volunteering. He would give handmade cards to the sick people, brightening the hospital rooms with his genuine smile. 10 years ago, Venus was just a 5-year-old child, but he had a special talent for making my sister smile. Edward's voice softened. When I learned he was Gemma's son, I felt it was destiny. Venus's eyes widened. I remember! I gave that lady a crayon drawing. Edward smiled. That's right, Venus. Gina treasured your drawings until the very end. Edward's expression tightened again. During our engagement, I had doubts about Madeline's and Xenia's cold and self-centered personalities, especially their attitude toward Gemma and Venus. But I was hoping they would change. Today's speech has completely shattered that hope. Edward slowly removed his wedding ring. Gasps of surprise rose from the audience. Today, I'm canceling this marriage, he said quietly but firmly. 10 years ago, Gina's last words to me were that real family respects and supports each other. Madeline and Xenia, you are living contrary to that teaching. Madeline suddenly screamed. This is a joke, right, Edward? What are you saying? This is no joke, Edward said quietly. I'm doing the right thing now. He walked over to Gemma and Venus. I've been searching for a long time for the kind soul I met at that hospital. He extended his hand to Gemma. Let's leave together. Gemma wiped away the tears streaming down her cheeks and took Edward's trembling hand. Venus also stood up and grasped Edward's other hand. Wait! Xenia shouted. Do you have any idea how much this wedding cost? Edward turned back and quietly said, I will cover all expenses. Please send the bills to my office. As the three of them left the venue, Edward respectfully bowed his head to the priest. I'm sorry for the disturbance. In the bright sunshine outside, Gemma felt like she could breathe freely for the first time. I can't believe it, she whispered. You really don't remember Gina? Edward gently asked. Gemma closed her eyes, tracing her memories. I can't forget her smile, especially during those last few weeks when the pain was severe. She was always positive. Gemma's voice trembled. But honestly, I didn't remember much about you back then. I was interacting with so many patients. I always remembered you, Edward said quietly. How much you devoted yourself to others. How strong and kind you were. After my sister passed away, I tried to find you, but I didn't know your contact information. Venus looked up at the two of them and asked, What are we going to do now? Edward placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. How about we have a quiet meal somewhere and let's talk about what happens next? Gemma smiled in her heart. A door that had been closed for a long time was slowly beginning to open. As Edward's Lexus pulled out of the church parking lot, angry shouts could be heard from behind. In the rearview mirror was the image of Madeline running with her wedding dress hitched up. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and her once perfect hairstyle was disheveled. Xenia was also chasing after her daughter, out of breath. Edward, come back! Madeline's screams reached inside the car. Edward sighed deeply and looked at Gemma. Are you okay? Gemma exhaled shakily as she looked out the window at the chaotic wedding venue. Guests were confused, whispering to each other, and some were taking photos with their mobile phones. Madeline's friends were surrounding Xenia, trying to calm her down. I don't know, Gemma answered honestly, but I want to leave this place with Venus. Venus was quiet in the back seat, but his eyes still showed traces of tears. Mom, are you okay? He asked in a small voice. Gemma turned back and smiled at her son. I'm fine, Venus. We're together. Edward parked the car at a small restaurant along the coast. From the terrace seats, they could see the calm sea, and the evening sky was tinged with gold. The three sat in silence for a while, staring at their menus. There were too many emotions to put into words. I'm sorry, Edward broke the silence, for creating this situation. Gemma shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. Rather, thank you for protecting us. She turned her gaze to her son, especially Venus. I'm fine, Venus said, his voice trying to be strong, but his small hands were visibly shaking. I know what Grandma and Aunt Madeline said isn't true. Edward gently placed his hand on Venus's shoulder. You're a special child, Venus. Do you know how much Gina looked forward to your visits? She called you her little son. Venus's face brightened. Really? Yes, it's true? Gemma also smiled. Gina's face always lit up when you came. Their food was served. Gemma ate with a sense of security she hadn't felt in a long time. Edward's quiet presence was strangely comforting. Edward, tell me, Gemma hesitantly asked, why did you get engaged to Madeline? Did you really love her? Edward thought for a moment before answering honestly. At first, I was attracted to her brightness. After losing Gina, my world had sunk into darkness. Madeline was full of energy, and being with her made everything around me seem brighter. He continued, turning his water glass. And when I learned she was your sister, I felt something like fate. Even if I couldn't remember you, maybe I felt some connection. Edward smiled ruefully. But as time passed, I realized Madeline's brightness was superficial. She constantly sought attention and lacked compassion, especially toward her family. Yet you still plan to marry her? Gemma asked curiously. Edward shrugged, embarrassed. I believed people could change. I tried to see her good side and… He hesitated. And to be honest, it was difficult to change a decision once made. The expectations from others were also high. Edward looked up and gazed at Gemma. But today, seeing you and Venus treated that way, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to follow my true feelings. His mobile phone rang. Madeline's name appeared on the screen. Edward sighed and ignored the call, but it soon started ringing again. Maybe you should answer it, Gemma suggested. Edward reluctantly answered the phone. Madeline's shouting voice leaked from the speaker. Gemma and Venus tried to focus on their meal, but they could hear Madeline's fierce accusations. Edward responded in a calm voice, though occasionally showing a tired expression. Madeline, I've made my decision, he finally said firmly. Let's talk through lawyers tomorrow. Don't contact me again tonight. After hanging up, a heavy silence fell. Sorry, Edward said apologetically. Gemma shook her head. Don't apologize. The situation is complicated, isn't it? Where are we now? Venus suddenly asked. The adults exchanged smiles at his innocent question. No, Edward considered. Maybe at the beginning of a new path. After dinner, Edward drove Gemma and Venus home. Stopping the car in front of the apartment, he walked with Gemma to the entrance. Thank you for everything today, Gemma said quietly. The moonlight dyed her hair silver. Thank you too. Edward looked straight into her eyes. Can I see you again tomorrow? The three of us? Gemma smiled. Yes, of course. Mom! Venus suddenly appeared at the entrance. He said he'll tell me all about Gina. Edward laughed. Of course, Venus, I promise. Gemma stood at the entrance, watching Edward return to his car. As he turned back and smiled at her, a warmth spread through her heart. Upon entering the apartment, there were several angry messages from Zanaya on the answering machine. Gemma, how could you do this to us? Madeline is hurt. You brainwashed Edward, didn't you? Gemma sighed and deleted the messages. Venus, take a bath. You have school tomorrow. Mom! Venus tugged at Gemma's sleeve. Do you like Edward? Gemma was surprised by her son's straightforward question. I don't know him well yet, Venus, but he seems like a good person. I like him, Venus said with conviction. He's Gina's brother, and he protected us. And he was watching your smile. Gemma stroked her son's head. You're very observant. That night, after Venus had gone to bed, Gemma was looking out the living room window. There was a mixture of confusion and hope in her heart. Her cell phone rang with a message from Edward. Did you get home safely? Is Venus okay? Gemma smiled as she replied. We're both fine, thank you. A reply came immediately. I'm glad. Good night, Gemma. How about coffee after you drop Venus off at school tomorrow? Gemma felt her heartbeat faster. Yes, that would be nice. Good night, Edward. She held her phone to her chest and exhaled deeply. The family rift, the wedding chaos, and this unexpected reunion. Everything was unfolding rapidly. But strangely, a peace she hadn't felt in a long time filled her heart. 1 year later. In autumn, with the beautiful maple leaves changing color, Gemma was hanging the sign for her new accounting office in Maple Park. The words Pattinson Financial Services gleamed in the morning light. The small business she had started with Edward's encouragement and support had gained a local reputation in just a few months. "Mom, hurry up! We'll be late for school!" Venus called out energetically. Now 11 years old, he had grown taller and wore a confident expression. Selected as captain of the soccer team, he was now popular at school. "I'm coming!" Gemma smiled at him. The changes in life were evident in her as well. Her shoulder-length hair had regained a healthy shine, and there was a light of confidence in her eyes. "I'll drive him." Edward poked his head out from the entrance of their new home. Since last Christmas, the three had been living together. They weren't engaged yet, but their bond deepened day by day. "But don't you have an important meeting today?" Gemma asked worriedly. Edward shrugged. "Being 30 minutes late won't end the world. It's Venus's important day." They stopped by a small cemetery in the center of the city. After placing fresh flowers on Gina's grave, the three quietly put their hands together. "I kept my promise, sis," Edward whispered softly. Gemma held his hand, and Venus placed a small stone on the gravestone. It was a special custom between Gina and Venus. "I still feel like she's watching over us," Venus said quietly. Gemma leaned against Edward, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, Gina," she said in her heart. A few miles away, Madeline was packing her belongings from her luxury apartment. After the wedding scandal, she had gradually become estranged from society, and her former friends had drifted away, especially after Xenia tried to file a lawsuit. Even after Edward had paid for all the wedding expenses, she lost her last supporters. Madeline was preparing to move to a small apartment. She could no longer maintain her lavish lifestyle and had to learn to live within her own income for the first time. The same was true for Xenia. Her friends avoided her, and her life, once full of vanity, gradually became a lonely one. Occasionally, she tried to contact Gemma, but always received a cold response. She was finally beginning to understand that her actions had created an irreparable rift. On Christmas Eve, Gemma, Edward, and Venus were relaxing in front of the fireplace. Venus was already asleep, dreaming of waiting for presents. Edward quietly took a small box from his pocket. "Actually, I have something I want to give you." Gemma stared at the box in surprise. When she opened it, there was a beautiful emerald ring. It was Gina's," Edward said quietly. She said, "When you meet someone truly special, give this to her." Tears welled up in Gemma's eyes. "Really? You and Venus have brought light to my life." Edward took her hand. "Will you marry me? Let's become a real family." "A real family is connected not just by blood, but by heart," Gemma smiled, speaking Gina's words. "Yes," she answered. "We're already a family, aren't we?" Outside the window, snow had quietly begun to fall, as if announcing a new year and a new beginning.